Welcome to
So Stipulated,
your legal podcast. I'm Alexis Gamliel, a plaintiff's attorney.
And I'm Gabrielle Gordon, a defense attorney.
And this is your legal podcast. This is going to be your go-to for legal issues, hot button legal matters that are in the news, cases that Gabrielle and I are both handling in our practices, modified a little bit, of course, so that we don't give away any confidential details.
Tips and tricks, employment law, hot button issues. And at the end of each episode, you can expect us to come to some sort of agreement. So oftentimes the law is viewed as contentious. You have an attorney on opposite sides of the aisle, and there's this misconception really, that there's no agreements. And we want to demonstrate through this podcast that we really can come to an agreement on these issues. And so the podcast is called So Stipulated, Stipulations of Formal Legal Agreement. And we will come to an agreement at the end of every episode.
Yeah, and for the non-lawyer viewers out there, which thank you for watching, thank you for listening, to both lawyers and non-lawyers alike. But the stipulation that Gabrielle is talking about is oftentimes when that agreement is encapsulated into a piece of paper, a written document where the agreement that both parties are entering into, the last sentence of the agreement is often, "It is so stipulated." So that is where the name comes from. And that's what we're going to get into in terms of talking about different issues where we reach some agreements after maybe arguing a little bit about some things, right?
And funny that you mentioned arguing about some things, because before we even started filming our first episode, which we're so excited to be here, we actually had a little bit of a disagreement about what the topic of this episode would be. We had decided that we wanted to do this episode about us, get to know the attorneys behind the podcast, and that was the disagreement.
Yeah, and that gave you a little bit of pause, right?
It did, because I was thinking, it seems very self-indulgent. Is it narcissistic to just be sitting here talking about us?
Some could say so, but
your perspective actually really changed my mind, which is why we're going to share about us this episode. So tell me what you said about that.
Yeah, so my perspective was, in the law, we take depositions, we examine witnesses at trial. And some of those witnesses include expert witnesses. And those are the thought leaders. They are the people with the credentials to provide opinions on various things that require a high level of expertise. And before we question those witnesses, we do a series of questions into that person's qualifications. So we call that in the legal field laying the foundation. So that's what this episode is all about, right? We want to lay that foundation for our viewers.
Right. We want to lay the foundation, get to know us, and why you should trust us as attorneys, why you should trust me as a defense attorney, and the advice I give to employers. Of course, don't come after me, employers. We do not have an attorney-client relationship, but why you can trust me and why you're going to be able to trust Alexis as well.
Yeah, and we represent opposite sides of the aisle. That's kind of the foundation for this whole podcast, is some healthy banter, spirited debate, and agreements where possible. Where possible being the key term.
Emphasis on where possible, because I think we're going to disagree a lot here.
That's right. And that's healthy. So basically, I'm a plaintiff's attorney. For the non-lawyers out there, if you don't know what plaintiff means, that's the individual. The individual is bringing the claims against the employer, the entity, the corporate entity, or the LLC. And so I represent individuals, employees, whereas Gabrielle, you represent the employers exclusively, right?
Right. I represent the employers, the shareholders, the managers, the individual supervisors. So I represent the company. So essentially the people that Alexis represents, they're suing my clients.
Yeah. And since I handle both personal injury and employment cases, but since you're an employment attorney, I'm an employment attorney, that's kind of the bulk of the discussion. Though that is going to be the bulk of the discussions that we'll have around the employment arena, right?
And fortunately, employment law is very interesting. So I think we will have a lot to talk about here.
And what I really wanted to ask you next, why did you decide to go into the employment law arena as opposed to any other practice area?
So you and I met in law school. Wow, that was 11 years ago. But in law school, I took a class called the Civil Litigation Practicum. And in that class, our hypothetical, I was on one side, actually on the defense side, and we had an employment law hypothetical, and that was what my class had to argue. So we wrote motions about that. We had oral arguments. We attended a mediation, and it was all mock. And I thought, wow, this is actually very interesting, because everyone is an employer or everyone is an employee. And so it relates to real people. And I was interested in that. I was always going to be an employee, an employer, or if you work for yourself. But what I really like about employment law is that no day is the same. Sometimes I'm giving advice on, a company, a CEO will call me and say, I need to fire this employee right now. And can you help me? And other days I'm drafting discovery and I'm, writing motions. So no 2 days are the same. And I think that that's what keeps me excited about this practice. Tell me about you. Why plaintiffs work and why employment law?
So let me start with the second question as to why employment law. I think your answer really resonates with me in that most people spend the vast majority of their days working, whether, like you said, it's for somebody else or for themselves, or they're supervising from the perspective of management. And I want to be a civil rights attorney. I want to be the enforcer of those civil rights that are the cornerstone of America and of California, where we have rights as employees to be free from discrimination, to be free from harassment and retaliation. So this is something that is very special to me and is sacred in terms of liberty and justice and equality for all. And it sounds like a big idea, but the way that I break it down in my practice is that it's case by case. And I think there's something really amazing about being able to put employers to account when they don't do the right thing, because not everybody does. And that's why they retain you, right?
Well, I think also employers want to do the right thing. I think that there's this belief that I represent corporations and I joke corporations are people too, but they really are, because when you think about who is behind the corporation, it is a person. You own your own law firm, you have your own business. And so a lot of times in these corporations, it's people who want to do right by their employees and they're earning a living for themselves. And so I think that justice is a noble pursuit that I think we see it on both sides. I think that, employees deserve a workplace free from harassment, and employers don't want their workplaces to have harassment or discrimination.
Right. And so to go back to your first question, why plaintiffs law? Because I want to represent the employee. I want to represent the hardworking, everyday Californian that is trying to support their family. And that is the cause that I have chosen. I am specifically, as you know, Gabrielle, you know me very well. I'm a big women's rights advocate, and that is what I have chosen to do in terms of how I spend my days, the way that I utilize my skills with respect to the written and spoken word. It's something I'm very passionate about.
I was going to say that you bring a lot of passion to your work, and I think that really translates well probably for your clients who see that you're passionate, you're a woman, you can really understand the struggle that they're experiencing perhaps the workplace. I think and it's interesting for me as a woman to be on the other side of those cases, because I also understand that there's women management really, and they can relate, but also a lot of times these corporations did not do what they're being accused of. And so they need someone to understand all sides of the issue and then be able to defend and really clearly see what's going on.
Yeah. And this is what we mean by healthy banter, spirited debate, right? Because I would argue that a lot of these companies are not doing the right thing, but that's because I'm really selective about the types of cases that I handle. And there are certainly employers who do the right thing. But at the same time, what I see most of is employers doing the wrong thing. And that's why they give me a call. That's why they email me. So I'm not getting the calls, hearing employees being like, oh, my employer was so nice to me today, or they respected my rights today. That's not when these employees pick up the phone.
Right. Employers, I always recommend that you have counsel go through all of your policies and go through your hiring and firing procedures, because it's true. A lot of times employers are not doing the right thing, and a lot of times it's not intentional. And so with help from counsel, they're able to prevent issues before they arise and before we even get into lawsuit territory. And so what I really enjoy about my job is helping employers to do the right thing so that they don't get sued. And so, if they do get sued, we can demonstrate that these employers did have the proper policies in place. They were paying their employees properly. They were giving their employees meals, and all of that is documented. So it's easier really to clean up the mess before it starts.
That's great. I would love if you cleaned up lots more messes for lots more employees, because that would be ideal. So I want to talk to you about the platform through which you represent employers, because I think it's incredible what you've been able to do since law school graduation. You work at a huge firm, a well-regarded firm, and I'm so proud of you, and I'm so happy to know you. And so tell me about, how did you break into the world of big law, and what the heck is big law for our viewers and listeners out there who don't know what that means?
First of all, thank you so much for that compliment. That really means a lot. And I'm really proud of you too. And we'll talk about our journey separately, because we kind of did different things. I went the big law path, and Alexis is a sole practitioner. She owns her own business. And so those are completely different and difficult paths in different ways. With regards to your question about big law, what is big law for someone who's not an attorney? It's these national law firms, highly regarded, often have thousands of attorneys, bring in a lot of revenue, and it's high stakes, high rewards, I would describe big law as. And I didn't go into big law right after law school. I started at a smaller firm, but I always say look for the side doors. And so if there's any law students listening to this podcast, if you didn't get a job right out of law school into big law, and that's your passion and that's where you want to be, there's always opportunities and ways to make connections and to go into the big law route. And I think that my ability to seek the side door is really how I practice law as well, in that there's always a creative way to get to your end goal. So I wanted to go into big law. I wanted to do employment law. And through connections and years of networking, that's how I got into the big law world. And there's always a creative solution. I think that that's the most important thing.
And how did you develop the skills to then succeed in this big law world? Were there any things that you did during law school that you felt were really helpful in that respect?
I think that the ability to connect with people, I think you're really good at that too. And that's why your clients really appreciate you. And I think that that is probably a skill set that I started working on in law school. You know, you realize, how am I going to spend my time in law school? Am I going to just be studying and get the best grades in the class? Or am I going to, start networking with attorneys and get to know my classmates? And it's interesting because...
And future opposing counsel too, right?
Absolutely.
I love that. The side door. I think no matter what career you're operating in, the side door is a great tool. Being creative and approaching issues creatively. So I, for a long time, thought that I wanted to be a business attorney. When I was in law school, for the first few weeks of law school, I was still down on that path. I interned at MTV Networks in the business and legal affairs during undergrad when I went to UCLA. And a lot of people don't even know this about me, actually.
I certainly didn't know this.
Because I bleed plaintiff's blood through and through.
Through law school,
I drink the Kool-Aid. Yes. I spread the Kool-Aid. I love it. I live and breathe the justice and access to justice and all of these things. But before... And that's not to say that there's not a cause for justice to be pursued when you're representing businesses or corporations. Because I'm friends with you, I'm friends with plenty of defense lawyers. I think there are very just causes on that side of the aisle too. But what I will say is that I always knew that I would either go to business school or to law school, because I believe in the power of higher education, and my parents were always very big on that. And
look how far it got us.
Yeah, and so when I was in undergrad, I did that internship. I didn't love it. I was not enthusiastic about what I was doing. And then when I went to UCLA, when I graduated, I wasn't sure, was it going to be the business route or the law school route? So I took the LSAT. I didn't get the pie in the sky score that I was dying to get. So I wanted to do something to beef up my resume. And I ultimately decided to go spend 2 years living and working abroad in Israel. And that's what I did. And while I was there, I learned the ins and outs of business decision making, because I worked at this company that provided business consulting services. And I was our marketing / data analyst position. I served in that role. And because I was in the marketing position, I was often part of these conversations with the higher level folks who were in the executive roles, the CEO, the CFO, and the COO. And I was at the table where important decisions were being made about the types of services that we wanted to provide, how we were going to market the message, and all of that. And little did I know that that was going to help me when I launched my own business.
I think that being at the table where decisions are being made and being included as women is really critical, so that we can learn from others how they did it, like those who paved the way before us. Really.
Yeah, exactly. And so then I took that experience. I applied to law school from Israel, and I remember putting the finishing touches on my personal statement there. When I returned and I went to Loyola, which is where you and I met, I still at that time thought that I was going to go the business route. But when I was servicing these clients in the business consulting firm where I worked previously, they were companies across a wide variety of industries, oil and gas, consumer products, all sorts of companies. And so now I look at it and those are my defendants across a wide variety of industries.
That's who I represent. And it's interesting because from that perspective that you had in Israel, you were able to see how they think, and you're kind of able to anticipate their next steps, I imagine, when their employees or former employees call you. You're probably able to anticipate how I'm going to advise them and how they're going to defend themselves against a lawsuit because you were at that table at one point. It's interesting because I think for plaintiffs, when they're involved in a lawsuit, it's almost this all-consuming thing. Whereas for a business and for these decision makers, it's one part of their day that they're dealing with attorneys. And so I think that contrast is really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so when I did get back to LA and I was at Loyola, I then started going to these lunchtime speaker sessions. And it's amazing because when you hear an attorney talk about the types of cases that they're handling and you are not in touch with that area of law already, it can be really eye-opening. And I remember there was this woman who gave an incredible talk in Robinson Courtroom at Loyola at a lunchtime talk. And I was just totally enraptured by what she was saying and how she was saying it. And she was a plaintiff's attorney, extremely successful, was a partner at the firm where she worked. And I basically never looked back after that talk. I introduced myself, we got coffee, and she made all these recommendations of the things that I should do. And I'm so grateful to have gone to that lecture because it changed the course of my life.
I think that person, it sounds like she became a mentor to you in some way. And I want to emphasize the importance of mentorship throughout our practice. I think that I certainly couldn't have gotten where I was without mentors guiding me and advising me. And I think that really having people advocate for you and your career is how you're able to be successful and then give back to the next generation. So I imagine one day you're going to be that attorney at Robinson Courtroom speaking to a group of law students. They're going to be starry-eyed looking at you, and they're going to want to be a plaintiff's lawyer too.
Yeah. Well, it was really cool because actually Southwestern Law School recently invited me to be a lunchtime speaker, and it was kind of full circle. And I loved seeing the excitement in the law students' eyes. And it was really, quite honestly, the first time I speak quite often, but it was the very first time where I had a full 1 hour block for me. And I got to tell my story and share some case studies about sexual harassment cases, pregnancy discrimination cases. And it was a really amazing experience. And I feel so humbled and grateful to have had that opportunity to pay it forward.
It's clear that you're really passionate about what you do and the clients that you represent. I think also, though, it's interesting. I think on the defense side, you don't see as much passion. I will say my background is a little bit different. Both of my parents are attorneys. And there's a video at my baby naming of my aunt who says, "I hope we don't have another lawyer in the family." Both my parents are attorneys. My brother is an attorney. My sister's in law school. My dad's siblings are all attorneys. And so I really grew up seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly of being an attorney. And I think that law students want to see passion, but the reality is a lot of times our job, there isn't passion there. It's not always interesting.
But I just love that you have a whole lawyer fam. Like that makes me feel so, like that's goals to me. Because, first of all, let's, along the lines of civility, I don't hate defense lawyers. A lot of plaintiffs' lawyers don't hate defense lawyers. In fact, I married a defense lawyer, and it's my dream for both of our kids to be lawyers. They will be whatever they want to be, but I have a very, very strong inkling that our daughter will certainly be an attorney.
She's already fighting with you about absolutely everything. I mean, she is definitely an advocate for herself. So I imagine she's going to be such an advocate in kindergarten, on the playground. It's so cute to see.
Yeah.
I guess kids of lawyers. I wonder if I was like that. I would have to ask my parents. But I mean, I've always been strong-willed. And I think that kind of quality is, all attorneys are strong-willed.
Okay, so here's a fun story about something that just happened yesterday. And I have a feeling that you as a child would say the very same thing as my daughter said yesterday. So she wanted me to put on this show that she's currently obsessed with, and it's called Gabby's Dollhouse. Quite on brand because you're Gabrielle. So she's talking about Gabby's Dollhouse. And she says, I want you to put it on right this moment. Please. And I was like, okay.
You know what?
Yeah, you did say
she
please.
did remember the please at the end.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because you have to be strong-willed, but then also kind and also civil. And so that's the best way to get what you want. And in negotiation, which I think probably negotiation is one of my better suits. I actually haven't been to trial. I'm hoping to go to trial this year, but I think that because I'm able to negotiate, and that's what's in the best interest of my clients oftentimes, is to resolve before a case goes to trial. I think that you have to have a good relationship with the other side to be able to successfully resolve your cases.
Yeah, right this moment, please. So
right now, this is the amount we're going to offer you. Take it, please.
Yes. Love that. Okay, so are there any guiding principles that dictate how you practice law?
Yes, interesting that you asked that because we've talked so much about justice. There's a principle, justice, justice, you shall pursue. I grew up hearing that, and it's really important to me that in all areas of my life, I behave in a manner that is in pursuit of justice. And so it's doing the right thing, acting in a moral manner, acting ethically as an attorney, and doing right by my clients. So even if I don't necessarily agree with what my client wants to do, if I have laid out all of the options and I've explained to them, this is what may happen if we go through this approach, everything I do is based on that foundation of justice, justice, you shall pursue. How about you? Do you have any principles or guiding lights that you look at for how you practice law?
I have many. Since I represent a lot of women, combating sexism and harassment in the workplace is a huge cornerstone of my practice. I would say that that's kind of paramount for me right now, and it should be paramount for a lot of people.
Well, the consequences are really high. If the workplace, is hostile, or if it breeds harassment, there's a lot of employee turnover. Unhappy employees don't create a good work environment for anyone.
Right. And there is so much sexism in this world, and it takes forms big and small, whether it's a microaggression or a macroaggression. I think even the terms that people use, like I once had a defense attorney refer to my client as a working mom. And I actually really don't like this term. I think that you would never find a defense attorney referring to a male client of mine as a working dad. So it really is sort of insulting sometimes, the mere terminology that is used both in the law and outside of the law. So these are things that I have become extremely sensitive and hyper aware of in my practice. And it's my job as, like I said, this enforcer of equality and justice to point it out and call it out as I see it, as professionally but as directly as I can.
I think also the two of us probably deal with sexism and microaggressions, and not at the workplace, but I mean, every female attorney has a story of walking in to take a deposition and being referenced as the court reporter. And so I think that we probably just still have a long way to come in society of how we're viewed. We've been talking for a long time here, so we're going to end our first podcast episode because lawyers can talk a lot about themselves or pretty much any legal topic. So we're going to come to an agreement, as promised, a stipulation.
And our stipulation for today is no matter what you decide to do with your life and with your career, just make sure that you find a path that makes you feel a strong sense of purpose.
So stipulated. All podcast episodes provide general information and do not constitute legal advice to any person with respect to any circumstance. This podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship with any person. All opinions reflected are our own. Submit your questions to the podcast to sostipulated1@gmail.com and follow this podcast on Instagram at So Stipulated. Personal contact for me, Gabrielle Gordon, and my co-host, Alexis Gamliel, is in the show notes. Thank you.